Everyone always talks about the American dream, but some of these places look more like the American nightmare. Join us as we reveal 40 examples of urban hell in America. Starting with number 1, Mole People of Las Vegas. Las Vegas is known for its bright lights and casinos, but just a few feet underneath it, there is another city entirely. Beneath the strip is a huge network of flood-control tunnels, and even though these tunnels were never meant for people, hundreds, and possibly over 1,000 now live down there. They build small rooms out of mattresses, plywood, tarps, shopping carts, and whatever else gets thrown away above ground. Some even have shelves, rugs, battery-powered lights, and other little things that almost make them look like apartments. Las Vegas can get brutally hot in the summer, but down there, it's hidden and shaded, usually about 20 degrees cooler than the streets above. There are also no cops to give you tickets for camping on the sidewalk and away from the non-stop noise. But they are still flood tunnels. Vegas gets very little rain, but when it does rain, it comes down in buckets. These drains run to Lake Mead, which makes sense. The problem, of course, is that when this happens, all of these people's stuff, garbage, etc. gets deposited right into the lake. When heavy rain hits, water can rush through the tunnels fast enough to wipe out everything inside, including people. There are groups that go into the tunnels with supplies and help for people trying to get out. So while tourists walk above ground between luxury hotels, a whole hidden population is living underneath the pavement. Number 2. Golden State Bridge's 50th anniversary. I don't know what's worse in this situation, claustrophobia or acrophobia. There are so many people on the bridge that you can't even see the pavement anymore. On May 24, 1987, San Francisco closed the Golden Gate Bridge to traffic for its 50th anniversary and expected around 50,000 visitors. Instead, roughly 800,000 people showed up, with an estimated 250,000 to 300,000 actually making it onto the bridge. It's just like entering the gym on a weekday. The bridge is designed with a slight upward arch, but under the weight of hundreds of thousands of people, it sagged by about 7 feet near the center. That dramatic dip sparked rumors that the bridge was on the verge of collapsing, but the structure was actually behaving exactly as its engineers intended. So the real problem wasn't the bridge, but the crowd. People became packed shoulder to shoulder, with almost no room to move. There were reports of people feeling sick from overcrowding, while a few tossed bicycles and bulky items over the side just to make more space around them. This really gives off some Final Destination vibes. But the good part is that despite what looked like the beginning of a disaster, nobody was crushed, and nobody died. Ever since that day, officials have never again allowed unrestricted pedestrian access for a major Golden Gate Bridge anniversary. Number 3. House on freeway. This house is literally hanging off the side of a freeway. It has a front door, a small walkway, a stone wall, tarps on the roof, and even what looks like a little yard. Honestly, it has more personality than half the new apartment buildings in Los Angeles. But then you realize this was built by unhoused people on public land, next to cars flying by all day. The way things are going, I wouldn't even be surprised if I saw this listed on Zillow for $2 million in a couple of years, labeled as having easy freeway access. And it isn't blocking any cars, so it's pretty impressive. Around 46,000 people are experiencing homelessness in Los Angeles, and some have decided to take matters into their own hands. The strange part is how much effort went into it. This is not just a tent, someone actually tried to make a home with walls, lighting, furniture, and a place to sit outside. Sources say this house even has electricity, pulling power directly from a street lamp. It even has a fire extinguisher outside, so he's up to building code. I really hope they have an air purifier in there though. Number 4. Claustrophobic house. This house makes me feel claustrophobic. Maybe it's just me, because the house definitely isn't. Anyways, it kind of reminds me of the house from Up. It belonged to Vera Koking, who bought it in Atlantic City back in 1961 as a summer home. Years later, casinos started taking over the neighborhood, and almost every nearby property was bought out. One developer reportedly offered her $1 million in the 1970s, but she refused because she simply didn't want to leave. Then, in the 1990s, Donald Trump wanted the land so his casino could build a limousine parking lot. When she still wouldn't sell, the city tried to use eminent domain to take her property and hand it over to the casino. Vera fought the case in court for 5 years, and in 1998, She finally won. While the buildings around her kept growing, her little 3-story house stayed exactly where it was, squeezed between massive steel structures. She lived there until 2010, nearly 50 years after buying it. Happiness and memories matter a lot, especially as you get older. So the takeaway here is that there's a lot more to life than just money. Eventually, the house was sold after she moved away and demolished in 2014, but the casino it was supposed to help didn't last much longer. In fact, Trump Plaza closed that same year and was demolished in 2021. That's too bad, because the house would have honestly made a great historical monument. For a while though, one ordinary house managed to stop one of the biggest developers in America. Number 5. 5-hour walk across the street. 4 hours and 58 minutes. That's how long it takes to walk from this Chick-fil-A to a nearby Best Buy in Northfield, Ohio. But the two buildings are literally right across the street from each other. So why does Apple Maps say the walk takes almost 5 hours? The problem is the road in between. To drive there takes less than 3 minutes, but there are no sidewalks connecting the two sides, no pedestrian crossing where you need one, and a wide divided highway with guardrails running down the middle. So instead of crossing the street, the map sends you on a giant loop through neighborhoods, side streets, and the nearest legal crossing. I don't know about you guys, but if I'm ever in that situation, I'm sprinting across it. You think that maybe Apple Maps just wants you to take the scenic route, but the map is just following the rules. The thing is, I don't think the long route should even take 5 hours in the first place. Google Maps, on the other hand, is telling you to risk it. The total walk time is 11 minutes, but the route has no sidewalks, and at the end, you literally have to jaywalk across this massive intersection. These roads have multiple lanes in each direction, and there's no pause in traffic because of the right turn arrows. So you better plan on J-running if you don't want to end up dead in this concrete wasteland. I guess Google Maps will really make you walk anywhere. Oh, and by the way, there are more examples like this all over the US. Let me know in the comments if you want to see more of this in our next videos. Number 6. Church surrounded by sewage. So this is how holy water is made. This is St. John Cantius Catholic Church in Detroit, and yes, it is surrounded on 3 sides by a wastewater treatment plant. For decades, this was a normal parish church, built for a working-class neighborhood, with weddings, funerals, and school events. Then Detroit kept growing, the sewer system expanded, and the neighborhood slowly got swallowed by industry. The wastewater plant opened nearby in 1939, and later expansions cleared hundreds of homes around the church. Somehow, the church survived, so now it sits there like a Gothic island in the middle of giant circular tanks of processed sewage. To be fair, cities do need wastewater treatment. Nobody wants the alternative, but it is still surreal to see. The parish finally closed in 2007 after the community around it had mostly disappeared, so they preserved the church during the construction of the treatment plant, only to abandon it there later. It is still standing, but it outlived the people, because the neighborhood it served is basically gone. Number 7. Stadium inside parking lot. This was the first game at Dodger Stadium on April 10th, 1962. More than 52,000 fans showed up and filled its 16,000 parking spaces, one of the largest parking lots in sports. And I'm sure people still complained about parking. From above, it looks like a giant Illuminati crab in a sea of cars. It looks strange, almost evil. The stadium itself is pretty iconic, but I can't take my eyes off the asphalt around it. In fact, the parking lot is so big that it could easily fit 10 more stadiums. It looks less like a baseball stadium and more like a giant parking lot that just happens to have a stadium in the middle. It was designed around car culture in Los Angeles, allowing fans to park close to their seats and walk straight inside. Sadly, public transport was never part of the concept. It also seems like they have not heard of underground parking back then. You could argue it's safer considering LA's consistent earthquakes that could pose risk to vertical parking garages, but I doubt that was the main reason. To be fair, this design made sense for early 1960s Los Angeles. The city was already being built around freeways, suburbs, and the idea that everyone would arrive by car. But instead of being part of a nearby neighborhood, Dodger Stadium sits far away from everything, so there's barely anything to walk to and not much reason to be there unless there is a game. And if you think that's bad enough, this was actually not just empty land before. it was home to Mexican-American communities before they were pushed out for a public housing project that never happened. A few years later, the Dodgers bought the land, and the old neighborhood became a stadium surrounded by parking. The traffic was already terrible in the 1960s. I'm sure it created some fun memories, as long as your car had AC and didn't overheat or break down. Good thing they found a way to make it easier for fans to get there, right? Well, no. It still is like this, today, more than 60 years later. Some things never change, I guess. Except the shape of the bumpers. There is a Dodger Stadium Express bus now. But as the second largest city in the country, Los Angeles should also have one of the biggest subway systems in the country. I also know that after the game, when everyone wants to get back to their cars and leave, it can take like 2 hours to finally leave the place. That's why fans started arriving late or leaving early to defeat the parking lot. I honestly feel like they should just remodel the whole parking space. They can totally make 2 huge parking structures and add restaurants, stores that can be open year-round. And it would have been much cooler if the stadium had been turned around 180 degrees to face the downtown skyline. Number 8. Highway built over water. Apparently, we are building interchanges over water now. This might be one of the worst, but at the same time, coolest highway interchanges in America. In Baltimore, Interstate 95 crosses the Patapsco River on a huge network of elevated bridges instead of cutting through more neighborhoods. The ramps twist over each other before sending drivers toward downtown Baltimore. It looks incredibly wasteful from above, but there is actually a reason for it. When Interstate 95 was being planned in the 1960s and 70s, engineers originally wanted to push more highways straight through Baltimore, demolishing thousands of homes. So naturally, the public protested. Instead, much of the interstate was shifted toward the waterfront, where there were already ports, industrial land, and fewer residential areas. So rather than destroying another neighborhood, they built this giant interchange over the river. To be fair, it is probably one of the better places to put a highway instead of overusable land or through neighborhoods. At least for humans, that is. As for the fish, I'm not sure if they like it so much. Still, from the air it looks less like an interchange and more like a giant Hot Wheels track that fell in the water. Number 9. 26,000 cars in one parking lot. I remember I parked right at the end of the lot, but now I'm all turned around. Was it the left side or the right? This is the Southport Auto Terminal in South Philadelphia, which is able to hold around 26,000 vehicles at once, making it one of the largest automobile storage lots on the East Coast. From above, it almost looks like someone copy-pasted the same parking row thousands of times. There isn't a single thing to break up the pattern, just miles of brand new cars sitting perfectly still. And because it's built on reclaimed waterfront, next to active shipping terminals, this sea of asphalt is actually considered one of the most practical uses for the land. But can you imagine if all this land were covered in solar panels? Number 10. Canadian wildfires. When people think about the worst air pollution in the United States, they usually picture factories or traffic. But in June 2023, some of the worst air quality on Earth came from forests burning more than 500 miles away in Canada. That year became Canada's worst wildfire season on record, with over 44 million acres eventually burning. In early June, the wind shifted and carried massive amounts of smoke straight into the northeastern United States. It looked like New York had woken up on another planet. The sky turned orange, the skyline almost disappeared behind a thick wall of smoke, and even the sun looked like a dim red light behind a dirty window. The city's air quality index climbed to nearly 500, which is considered hazardous for everyone, not just people with asthma or other health conditions. Schools canceled outdoor activities, flights were delayed, sporting events were postponed, and millions of people were told to stay inside if they could. The smoke was so thick that it even blocked enough sunlight to cool parts of the city by several degrees. A few weeks later, the same smoke spread into the Midwest and gave Chicago some of the worst air quality in the world. Number 11. Unfinished intersection. It looks like someone built half a highway interchange and then just walked away. You can see ramps peeling off in every direction, except one of them simply disappears into the trees. This is the unfinished interchange between Interstate 84 and Route 9 in Farmington, Connecticut, also known as the Farmington Stack. Back in the 1960s, Connecticut had much bigger plans for its highway system. The idea was to build another beltway around Hartford that would continue north through towns like Bloomfield before eventually connecting with Interstate 291. The state even built this full 4-level interchange decades before the rest of the highway existed, so it would be ready when construction reached it. Then everything changed. Construction costs exploded, federal highway funding slowed, local residents fought the project, and Hartford's rapid suburban growth started to level off. By the 1970s, the northern extension no longer looked worth building, so the project was quietly abandoned. That left one entire side of the interchange leading absolutely nowhere for decades. Number 12. Hawaii's commie blocks. Never thought I would see commie blocks in Hawaii, but here we are. The person taking the photo should have waited for a cloudy day. It still looks too cheerful. These are the Makaha Valley Towers on the west side of Oahu, built in 1970 during Hawaii's post-statehood construction boom. The complex is made up of 4 nearly identical 20-story towers with a total of 586 condominium units. But unlike the apartment blocks of Eastern Europe, these were not government housing at all. They were built as private condominiums for people who wanted ocean views without paying Waikiki prices. It might look like someone copy-pasted a Soviet apartment block onto a tropical island, but it's just the design that happened to follow the same modernist formula. Repetitive balconies, flat roofs, exposed concrete, and identical floor plans stacked over and over again. They are actually a pretty efficient use of land. Nearly 600 homes fit onto a relatively small area, leaving most of the surrounding valley untouched, instead of covering it with endless suburban streets. Number 13. Thank you, Wisconsin, for roundabouts. This is what happens when you finally discover roundabouts and get a little too excited. It reminds me of the magic roundabout in England. It seems like Wisconsin is the flat sandbox map where people play with infinite money to build experimental interchanges and intersections. Is this considered a dumb-dumbbell bell or a dumbbell-dumbbell interchange? Let me know in the comments. Anyway, this is along Highway 41 near Green Bay, where the main freeway, ramps, and frontage roads all meet in one strange little knot. At first, it looks completely insane. Instead of one normal intersection, you get what looks like 4 mini traffic circles holding hands. The weird part is that it actually makes sense. The inner roundabouts handle cars getting on and off the freeway, while the outer ones connect the local frontage roads. That keeps local traffic away from the highway ramps and removes the need for a bunch of traffic lights. Still, imagine trying to explain this while giving someone directions. Go through the first roundabout, ignore the second roundabout, enter the third roundabout, then emotionally recover. Wisconsin may have solved traffic, but it also invented the Garlic Clove interchange. Honestly, it looks silly, but it also seems like a safe and efficient way to get access in every direction. The worst part is for people who just want to go straight across it. I feel like if I had to go through all of these, I'd feel dizzy by the end. It's still better and smoother than 4 traffic light intersections though, and if you're unsure whether you want to turn back, you get 4 chances. Oh, and by the way, there are many more examples like this in Wisconsin. Number 14. Paris, Tennessee. Guys, I have good news for you. If you want to visit the Eiffel Tower and can't afford a flight to Europe, but you live near Tennessee, you can go to Paris, Tennessee. Hear me out. We've already talked about Paris, Texas on this channel, but apparently America was not done making backup versions of France. This is a small city of around 10,000 people in western Tennessee, and yes, it has its own Eiffel Tower. The tower is about 70 feet tall, so it is not exactly competing with the real one, but to be fair, it is much easier to park next to. The original version was built in 1990 by engineering students at Christian Brothers University in Memphis for a festival celebrating France. It was made out of wood, but the university could not keep it because students kept trying to climb it. A few years later, the tower was moved to Paris, Tennessee, because honestly, where else was it supposed to go? The wooden version eventually fell apart, so it was replaced with a stronger steel version that still stands today. So next time someone says they visited Paris or the Eiffel Tower, make sure you ask which one. Number 15. AMARG Boneyard. You're looking at the world's largest aircraft graveyard, the AMARG Boneyard in Tucson, Arizona. It sits next to Davis Monthan Air Force Base and covers around 2,600 acres. There are over 3,200 retired military planes sitting there, along with thousands of engines and parts. And no, these planes are not just abandoned. Old military aircraft are flown in, cleaned, drained, sealed, covered in a protective coating, and parked in these perfect rows. Some will never fly again and are used for parts, while others are kept in storage in case they are needed later. And some are actually repaired and returned to service, which is why the word regeneration is in the name. And the reason it is in Tucson is actually pretty simple. The desert is dry, the ground is hard, and metal lasts much longer here than it would in a wet climate. Number 16. Cemetery inside basement. Why do I feel like I've had a nightmare about this before? It looks like a cemetery inside a parking garage. I never would have thought an indoor graveyard could even be a thing. It's under Center Church on the Green in New Haven, Connecticut. But the graves were there first, some dating back to the 1600s, until the church was built directly over them in 1813. Instead of digging everyone up, they left the graves and headstones where they were, then built the crypt around them. So now there are 137 marked gravestones under the church, with dates ranging from 1687 to 1812. And that might not even be the full count, because some believe up to 1,000 unmarked remains are still buried under that same area. In simpler terms, the graveyard used to be at ground level, then the street was raised and built right over it. I don't know if this is more clever or creepy. You can walk under the church and see old headstones still standing there, protected from rain, vandals, and time. I think this technically also makes it a catacomb. Outside, the green looks like a normal downtown park. Also, if you guys want to visit it, there are guided tours and everything. May they rest peacefully. Number 17. House in the middle of highway. This might be one of the worst located houses in America. It kind of looks like someone forgot to demolish it before building the highway. The house sits on a tiny strip of land between North Washington Avenue and North 2nd Street in Minneapolis, next to Interstate 94. It was built back in 1917, long before the interstate existed. Then the city expanded, the I-94 was built in the 1960s, and the neighborhood around it slowly disappeared, except for the house. Instead of moving it, they just left it stranded in the middle of a sea of traffic. Today, thousands of cars and trucks pass by it every hour, just a few feet from the front yard. To make it even worse are a massive paper mill and an industrial boat storage yard that operate day and night. So you've got constant highway noise, heavy industry, and the occasional smell from paper production all in the same place. At least there aren't any neighbors, right? The strange part is that the house itself isn't abandoned. People have actually lived there, and it has even been seen listed for sale more than once. Real estate agents describe it as centrally located, which is undeniable. Number 18. PhoenixMart. Guys, I think I found Area 52. Just off Interstate 10 near Casa Grande sits one of Arizona's strangest modern ruins. It's called PhoenixMart, and at first, it looks like an abandoned mall in the middle of the desert, but it was never supposed to be a normal mall. This massive structure was planned as an international trade center, designed to connect overseas manufacturers directly with US buyers. With over 1 million square feet of space and room for thousands of vendors, the project had huge ambitions. Construction began in the early 2000s, and for a while, it actually looked serious. Then the money problem started, along with lawsuits, delays, and an FBI investigation into possible investor fraud. A lot of the funding was tied to the EB-5 visa program, where foreign investors put money into American projects in exchange for a path to residency. By 2017, the project had been abandoned, leaving behind this enormous red rectangle quietly baking in the Arizona desert. This is what PhoenixMart looks like today, after being abandoned for almost 8 years. The scale feels strange compared to the emptiness around it, just a 1 million square foot monument in the middle of the desert. They even had the signs and logo for the mall already installed. It became a fossil before it was even finished. Number 19. Meta's new data center. This comparison is one of the craziest I have seen so far. This is Meta's huge Hyperion data center campus project in rural Richland Parish, Louisiana. To be fair, the outline shows the entire campus, not just one giant building, but Meta has already bought around 3,600 acres of land there, which is almost 4 times the size of Central Park. The data center campus is planned to reach nearly 10 million square feet. What's even more shocking is the pace at which these things are growing. This image shows Meta's Rosemount campus from 2025 in Minnesota, which is large, but still reasonable. This is the Stargate one in Abilene, Texas, just 1 year later. The leap is brutal, but Hyperion takes things to another level. Meta first announced around $10 billion of investment here, but the plan has since grown to more than $50 billion as the company races to build more computing power for AI. Because it's planned to eventually need up to 5 gigawatts of electricity, which is about as much as a small region, they are also funding 7 new natural gas power plants to help supply that huge demand. So if you're wondering why they built this in rural Louisiana instead of a dense city like Paris, this is exactly why. You need thousands of acres, huge amounts of electricity, cheap land, water systems, and enough empty space to fit everything. Supporters say it will bring jobs, new infrastructure, and one of the biggest technology projects Louisiana has ever seen. Number 20. Centralia. So I guess this is what they really meant by highway to hell. This is Centralia, Pennsylvania, a town that is literally burning from below. At first, this just looks like an empty road, but it used to be a coal mining town, and in 1962, a fire somehow reached the abandoned mines beneath it. The town's garbage dump was set on fire near an old strip mine, wanting to be cleared before Memorial Day, but the fire spread into a coal seam underground. Once coal starts burning below the surface, it is incredibly hard to put out, and the fire is expected to burn for another 300 years. They tried flooding it with water, but it could not be put out, so they have to let it burn itself out. For years, people still lived above it, while smoke, heat, and toxic gases leaked through cracks in the ground. In 1981, a 12-year-old boy nearly died when a sinkhole suddenly opened in his grandmother's backyard. That was the moment everyone realized this was not just some weird local problem. By the 1980s, the government began buying out residents, and more than 1,000 people eventually left. Most of the buildings were demolished, the zip code was removed, and Route 61 had to be rerouted after the pavement cracked and warped from the heat. For years, the old abandoned highway was covered in graffiti until it was buried in 2020. Today, only a handful of people still live there, and the fire is still burning underground and could keep going for centuries. It also looks like a real-life version of Silent Hill. If you made it to this part of the video, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Also, 98% of you who watch my videos aren't subscribed, so make sure to hit that sub button and notifications bell if you want to see more videos like this. Thanks guys. Now let's get back to the video. Number 21. Giant Toxic Lake. At first glance, Butte looks like a perfectly normal mountain town in Montana, until you notice a gigantic lake carved into the hillside behind it. But that isn't a natural lake at all, it's the Berkeley Pit, a former open-pit copper mine that eventually filled with groundwater after mining stopped in 1982. It might look peaceful at first, but the water is loaded with sulfuric acid and dissolved heavy metals like arsenic, copper, zinc, and cadmium. In simpler terms, the lake is so toxic that it kills birds that land on it. When thousands of migrating snow geese landed there in 1995, around 340 died, and another incident in 2016 killed more than 3,000 snow geese. Today, crews use radar, lasers, and even drones to scare birds away before they land. If the water keeps rising, it could contaminate nearby groundwater and river systems, so massive treatment plants constantly pump and clean the water to keep it below a dangerous level. Without it, the lake could rise to the water table, poisoning not just the town's water, but also the Columbia River. The mine itself swallowed entire neighborhoods, forcing communities like Meaderville and McQueen to disappear as the pit expanded. Even after producing billions of dollars worth of copper that helped electrify America and supply both world wars, the mine left behind one of the largest environmental cleanup projects in US history. I can imagine the smell is pretty awful as well. Number 22. An entire city fits here. This is a size comparison that makes American sprawl look insane. The red outline is Hoboken, New Jersey, a city with about 60,000 people. And what fits inside the same amount of land here? 2 highway interchanges, a mall, office parks, strip malls, parking lots, and a lot of roads connecting parking lots to other parking lots in Louisville, Kentucky. The thing is that Hoboken is not some tiny village. It has apartment buildings, shops, schools, restaurants, parks, train access, and a real street grid. It is very pedestrian friendly and has good public transport, so you can easily live there without owning a car. In this part of Louisville, it is a completely different setup. Without these two interchanges, I'm pretty sure this area would not be able to function. Most of the space is designed around driving, storing cars, and moving cars between separate destinations. So instead of 60,000 people living in a compact city, you get a commercial zone where walking across the street can feel like playing Crossy Road in real life. To be fair, not every place needs to be that dense, but the comparison shows how much land American suburbia can use without actually creating much of a city. Some people prefer living in dense, pedestrian-friendly areas, while others prefer more spread-out suburban areas. To be fair, America is the third largest country on Earth, so there really is no shortage of land. Let me know, guys. Where would you prefer to live? Number 23. The Big I. Next time you ask why all kids do nowadays is sit on their phones and don't play outside anymore, remember this is what the outside looks like in some cities. This almost looks like abstract art, but it's just the busiest interchange in New Mexico. Honestly, the more I look at this, the more confused I get. Every single curve exists so cars can avoid stopping for a few seconds, making it very efficient for drivers, but not very useful for much else. Yeah, good luck escaping from here. To be fair, I would go out of my way on a road trip just to see it with my own eyes. Also, this is going to be a nightmare to replace when these bridges are no longer safe. I guess they'll probably just close it and build the same thing next to it. The Big I in Albuquerque has around 300,000 vehicles passing through on a typical day, so the engineers are solving a very real traffic problem. The strange part is that it only looks this chaotic from above. Drivers usually follow a few signs, take their exit, and barely notice they're driving through what looks like a bowl of concrete spaghetti. The current interchange opened in the early 2000s, replacing an older design that had become dangerously overloaded as Albuquerque grew. It even finished well ahead of schedule, but traffic has continued growing so much that some ramps still back up during rush hour. So no matter how many flyovers you build, a growing city eventually fills them too. Each new lane encourages more people to drive, which eventually brings the traffic right back. Meanwhile, this single interchange takes up a huge amount of land that could otherwise hold neighborhoods, businesses, or parks. From an engineering point of view, it's genuinely impressive, but from a city planning point of view, it feels like an entire area was redesigned just to keep traffic moving, even though the traffic never stops growing. So I understand why this kind of infrastructure is important in the US. My only problem is the huge amount of wasted space between the roads. I mean, surely they could have built these highways closer together and used less land. Number 24. Golf course in the desert. If you love playing golf, this place is for you. That's because Palm Desert, California, is basically a giant golf resort that people just happen to live in, right in the middle of the desert. It's located east of LA, where summer temperatures can push well past 110 degrees, but somehow, in the middle of all that heat, there are endless strips of perfectly green grass. Palm Desert has around 50,000 people, but the whole place feels designed for retirees, resort guests, and anyone who owns polo shirts. If you chose to buy a house here, I'd assume you were a golfer. Otherwise, it seems like a waste. I'm also wondering about the cars. Do they have special insurance if you park near a golf course? I just think they should line the golf courses with some convenient shopping options and add parking as well. There's too much grass. The weird part is that the streets don't really form neighborhoods as much as they form loops around private clubs. A lot of the homes back directly onto fairways, ponds, golf cart paths, and landscaping that has to be constantly maintained. There are golf cart lanes, gated communities, wide roads, and huge blocks where walking anywhere useful is basically not the point. And because this is the desert, all that greenery brings up a very obvious question. Where is the water coming from? Some courses use recycled water, but it still takes a huge system to keep a resort landscape alive in a place that naturally wants to be dry. So I'm guessing the water use and cost of maintaining all those golf courses must be pretty high. One man's hell is another man's heaven, I guess. Number 25. Suburb with a nice view. This is America in one photo. It also clearly shows the 4 pillars of urban hell. In the front, you have suburban strip mall hell, combined with a giant parking lot. Then behind it, There's the old, rusty industrial layer, with smokestacks and utility buildings that look like they were designed to survive a minor apocalypse. And behind that, almost mockingly, you get the modern skyline, with the Comcast corporate towers rising over everything. Oh, there's also a McDonald's right next to it. Philadelphia is old enough that all its different eras just sit next to each other without blending together. You can buy construction tools, file your taxes, and stare at corporate skyscrapers all in the same view. It is fully functional, just in the most brutally practical way possible. Number 26. Roadwork in Nebraska. In Nebraska, along Jeffers Street in North Platte, road construction, puddles, orange barrels, and fast food signs blur into one long temporary landscape. For a while, 2 out of 3 lanes on Highway 83 were closed while crews replaced almost everything underneath the road. The pavement, wastewater pipes, lighting, and sidewalks all had to be rebuilt at once. Locals complained about the closures, especially since the work happened during the city's biggest festival, Nebraska Land Days. But engineers said the massive shutdown was necessary so the road would last for decades without needing another project this big. Meanwhile, the scene looked exactly how you might imagine. A Wendy's, Burger King, Raising Cane's, and an auto parts store rising out of the mud like the final form of roadside America. One more lane, one more drive-through, one more reason to stop and then keep moving. But it's always good to see infrastructure being improved, I guess. Number 27. How cars destroyed Old Dallas. The biggest difference between Old Dallas and modern Dallas isn't the skyscrapers. It's everything at ground level. A century ago, downtown Dallas was packed with narrow buildings, storefronts, hotels, theaters, and streetcars running down the middle of the street. People actually filled the sidewalks because nearly everything they needed was within walking distance. Starting in the 1950s, Dallas embraced the automobile more than almost any other major American city. Entire blocks of historic buildings disappeared, not because they were falling apart, but to make room for parking lots, wider roads, and eventually massive freeway interchanges. Many of those parking lots are still there today, so in some parts of downtown, land that once held dozens of businesses now stores a few hundred parked cars. Highways like Interstate 30, Interstate 35E, and the elevated Woodall-Rogers Freeway also cut through neighborhoods, separating downtown from places like Old East Dallas, South Dallas, and Oak Cliff. It's wild to me how crowded the streets were with pedestrians, which is a huge contrast to downtown today. Number 28. Homeless White House. This should get an award for the most American homeless encampment ever built. That's because someone literally built a replica of the White House out of tarps, plywood, and whatever other materials they could find. They even added a little white picket fence to complete the look. This was in Seattle's industrial neighborhood just south of downtown, hidden between warehouses and shipping containers. The builder, Danny, said he wanted to prove that homeless encampments didn't have to look like a disaster. He used to work in construction around Seattle before developing severe carpal tunnel syndrome that left him unable to keep working. He said he lost both his home and his vehicle and eventually ended up living on the streets. But this wasn't just a shelter, it was also meant to be a protest against Seattle's homelessness system, which he believed was failing the people it was supposed to help. Unfortunately, it didn't last long because the city eventually cleared the encampment, along with the rest of the camp. So the only White House Seattle ever had lasted just a few weeks before being demolished. Number 29. Fort Worth, Texas. Guys, help me understand. Is this the true meaning of fort in Fort Worth, Texas? At first, this looks like a medieval fortress protecting the suburbs, but it's actually just an abandoned grain elevator. The Worth Heights grain elevator was built in the early 1900s, back when North Texas was a major hub for moving wheat and other crops by rail. For decades, it was one of the tallest structures around, holding millions of bushels of grain before trains carried them across the country. Now it's empty. But the weird part is what showed up next to it. A brand new apartment complex was built almost right beside this 100-year-old industrial giant. So now hundreds of people wake up every morning with a view of what looks like the final boss of agriculture. It looks great for airsoft or paintball though. Number 30. America's heaviest state. In West Virginia, nearly 1 out of every 2 adults is considered obese. The strange part is that the states with the highest obesity rates tend to cluster together across Appalachia and the Deep South. Louisiana, Mississippi, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Alabama, and Kentucky are all near the top. At first, it sounds like people are just eating too much fast food, which in some part is true. Alabama ranks highest in overall fast food density, with about 6.3 restaurants per 10,000 residents. But the real picture is more complicated. After seeing a road like this, it starts to make sense. That's because these states also have some of the country's highest poverty rates, less access to healthcare, fewer grocery stores with fresh food, and communities built almost entirely around driving. When cheap, high-calorie food is everywhere, healthy food costs more, and there is nowhere safe or convenient to walk, the outcome is not exactly surprising. Culture plays a role too. States like Louisiana are famous for incredible comfort food, while West Virginia has a long history of hearty meals built around coal mining and manual labor. The problem is that lifestyles change much faster than diets did. Today, many people burn far fewer calories while eating the same kinds of meals their grandparents needed to get through physically demanding jobs. In 2022, West Virginia, Louisiana, and Oklahoma were the first states where adult obesity rates climbed above 40%. Number 31. Drive-through cemetery. This is the weirdest, but also kind of the coolest thing I've ever seen. This house has a road going right through the center. It looks like someone drove straight through the middle of a house, but that's actually how it was designed. But imagine if this were your house. Setting up a toll booth would definitely be a great way to make some extra money. It sits at the entrance to Prospect Hill Cemetery in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, built in the late 1800s as the cemetery caretaker's house, with a covered archway underneath so visitors and horse-drawn carriages could pass through without blocking the entrance. From the street, it looks like one house split in half. Inside though, it's basically two separate living spaces connected by the roof. For years, the larger side was used as the main home, while the smaller side served as a studio apartment. That door exiting right into the active road is terrifying. I could think of some unique conversations people might have had there, like, "Remember, sweetie, always look both ways before going into your bedroom." Jokes aside, I'm shocked that this is in the US instead of somewhere with lots of legacy buildings, like the UK. Its backyard opened directly into the cemetery, which the owner said was actually one of the quietest places in the city. When it went up for sale, it was listed for less than $60,000, mostly because the layout was so unusual. Number 32. Rainbow Bridge, Texas. If someone says their dog crossed the Rainbow Bridge, maybe don't show them this one. Now I understand why some people are afraid of bridges. It looks like Texas accidentally built a highway ramp into the afterlife. It's called the Rainbow Bridge, which sounds beautiful, until you look at it. This thing is in Bridge City, Texas, and yes, the town is literally called Bridge City because of this bridge. It was built in the 1930s to cross the Neches River, where ships and oil industry traffic needed to pass underneath, which is why it climbs so aggressively instead of just being a normal little bridge. It has around 177 feet of clearance, partly because engineers wanted the USS Patoka, a huge Navy airship tender, to be able to fit under it. But the ship it was designed for never actually went under the bridge, so they basically built a terrifying roller coaster for a guest that never arrived. The photos make it look even worse because long camera lenses compress the distance and turn the slope into a cartoon launch ramp. At least you get a good view of the power lines when you reach the top. The actual gradient looks like this. It's still not nothing, but it's far less extreme than the many distorted pictures you find online, and some locals say it still feels pretty dramatic when you drive up it. More than 1,000 bridges in Texas are considered structurally deficient and in need of upgrades, including the Rainbow Bridge. Part of me just wants to grab my bike and ride down it as fast as I can. Number 33. Baltimore. Baltimore is one of those cities where one block can look beautiful, and the next one can look burned out, empty, or almost abandoned. These row houses were once full of working-class families. The streets had corner stores, churches, busy sidewalks, and kids playing on the front steps. Then people started leaving the city, jobs disappeared, families moved to the suburbs, and many neighborhoods stopped getting the money and attention they needed. Baltimore went from almost 1 million people in 1950 to around 570,000 today. That left the city with way more houses than people to live in them. By recent counts, Baltimore has more than 13,000 vacant buildings and tens of thousands of empty lots. On some blocks, nearly every house is boarded up. You can still see the front steps, old doors, and brick walls, but nobody lives there anymore. It makes me relax a little, knowing trees can take over abandoned land in just a few years. The city still has good neighborhoods, but blocks like this show how hard it is for a city to recover after losing hundreds of thousands of people. At least it says no shoot zone here, so you know you're safe. Number 34. Texas has a concrete addiction. This is what freedom looks like. It's also what a lack of proper public transportation looks like. I have a feeling that the Texas Department of Transportation has a concrete addiction. This is the I-35 in South Austin, where they're building elevated managed lanes over a freeway that already feels like it ate the city. The project adds 2 HOV lanes in each direction, plus rebuilt ramps, bypass lanes, and some bike and pedestrian paths. So technically, yes, they are improving infrastructure. But visually, it looks like Austin is slowly being turned into the underside of an airport parking garage. Also, the system requires like 97% of transportation dollars to go to moving cars instead of moving people efficiently. And if this were an elevated train, it wouldn't need to be this big. I mean, they still have the room for rail, trams, and high-speed trains, and I feel like that would take the state to the next level. The weird part is that the Texas Department of Transportation is removing the old elevated I-35 decks in central Austin because they were noisy, ugly, and divided neighborhoods. But just a few miles south, they're building a new elevated version. The extra lanes encourage more driving, farther development, and more traffic. Then everyone stands around shocked and says, "We need more lanes." And that's how you get concrete shelves hanging over the road like a brutalist lasagna. Just imagine how many more of those there will be in the future. I think this is what Texas could look like. Tokyo has a metro area of around 40 million people, but highways are only one part of its transportation system. It also has one of the most intense rail systems on Earth, so millions of people can travel without ever touching a steering wheel. Austin's population has more than doubled since the early 1990s, but it seems like the highway was never designed for a city this big. The US could have both trains and freeways, but many cities somehow have weak public transport and traffic-filled highways at the same time. I really hope they won't replace the train tracks here with 2 more lanes for cars. Researchers have studied induced demand for decades. Make driving easier, more people drive, development spreads farther out, and before long, the new lanes fill up too. That's why old photos of Austin traffic still look almost identical today. The roads change, but the result never really does. The irony is that many people remember sitting in traffic here long before the excavators showed up. Now they sit in even worse traffic while the road gets rebuilt to carry even more cars. At first it feels like the project is solving a problem, then you realize it's just mostly trying to keep up with one of the fastest growing regions in America. That's why people joke that Texas only has 2 seasons, summer and highway construction. It doesn't get much worse than this really. All it takes is one person to hit his brakes for no reason, then traffic backs right up, with everyone else hitting their brakes. I just feel like people weren't meant to live like this. I guess this is also why most Americans don't drive stick shift. People who lived centuries ago could never have imagined something like this. I think they should just add some billboards whilst waiting in traffic. You are not stuck in traffic, you are the traffic. This is I-45 near the Woodlands, just north of Houston. The Woodlands was planned in the 1970s as a forested master planned community, which sounds peaceful until you realize everyone still has to funnel onto the same giant freeway. So you get pine trees, blue skies, and nice suburbs, next to a concrete river of brake lights stretching toward Houston. The weird part is that the Woodlands was designed to feel like an escape from the city, but daily life still depends heavily on driving into the city, around the city, or through the city. Everyone moved toward the trees to get away from Houston, but Houston caught up to them. Looking at Houston from above for 1 second, it almost looks normal. At first you see the skyline, until your eyes drift downward and realize the real main character is the freeway system. Proper urban spaghetti. The Houston metro area has more than 7 million people, so moving people around was always going to be complicated. The city once had streetcars before cars and highways became its entire personality. Now, entire neighborhoods sit beside these massive corridors, with little bridges acting like crosswalks over a river you definitely should not fall into. From the air, it looks almost impressive, but from up close, it's just noise, heat, exhaust, and the feeling that every little errand requires merging across 6 lanes. To be fair though, many areas that used to be covered in parking have now been filled with greenery, so I think there's still hope. Number 35. Depressing apartment buildings in Illinois. I can't explain it, but something about this place feels weirdly nostalgic to me. It's basically one enormous row of nearly identical homes sitting next to an empty field in Illinois. White siding, dark roofs, evenly spaced windows, and then the exact same thing again and again as far as you can see. The lack of hills and trees is what really gets me though. At first, these might look like army barracks, but they are actually townhomes, part of a development called Falcon Place in Mascoutah, Illinois. And the repetition isn't an illusion. The original development was planned with 18 buildings and 144 townhome units, followed by another 64-unit phase. The development is also pretty new, which helps explain why the trees and landscaping still haven't had much time to grow. And we're looking at the backside of the buildings. From the front, they have brick details, entrances, parking, and look a lot more like normal townhomes. From this angle though, they honestly look more like Amazon warehouses than homes. But this kind of repeated design is a pretty straightforward way to build a lot of housing efficiently in one development. And even if it isn't the prettiest thing to look at from every angle, townhomes like these can fit far more households onto the same amount of land than spreading them across individual detached houses. Number 36. New versus old suburbs. This image perfectly shows the separation of new and old suburbs in Stockton, California. It also shows the battle between neighborhoods with trees and neighborhoods without them. The neighborhood on the right was mostly built decades ago, when homes sat on larger lots and developers left plenty of room for trees to grow. Those trees aren't part of an original forest, they've simply had 40, 50, or sometimes 70 years to mature. Now look at the neighborhood on the left. Almost every house was built much more recently. The streets are wider, the lots are smaller, and the homes are packed together as tightly as zoning rules allow. They might as well be row houses at that point. Developers do this because fitting more houses onto the same piece of land is simply more profitable. Supporters say this creates more housing and helps keep prices from climbing even higher, but others think that it also creates neighborhoods that feel repetitive, with less privacy, smaller yards, and barely enough room for a tree to grow. And if any trees are planted, they will eventually grow, but it can take decades before the neighborhood looks anything like the one across the street. The older neighborhood was built under different zoning rules, making it less dense, which is why many people think it feels more comfortable. Number 37. Lonely balcony. This might be the loneliest balcony in Los Angeles. It ruins the symmetry just enough that once you notice it, you probably won't be able to stop looking at it. At first it looks like somebody forgot to install a couple of windows, but that little black rectangle is actually an open-air terrace inside 2 California Plaza in downtown LA. The tower is 52 stories tall and rises about 750 feet. But somehow, across this huge wall of reflective glass, there appears to be only one tiny opening to the outside. It kind of looks like a charging port for the building. The weird part is that it wasn't always there and only appeared after renovations around late 2024. People might think it's some private executive balcony, smoking area, or emergency exit, but it actually connects to an office cafe and is simply a small outdoor seating area. That somehow makes it even funnier. Imagine working inside more than 1 million square feet of office space, and this is the one tiny spot where you can actually go outside and feel the weather. Number 38. The beautiful shores of America. Ah, the American dream. Well, actually, maybe not here. This might be one of the saddest looking beachfront properties in New Jersey. For some reason, it really reminds me of the beaches in GTA 4. At first, it looks like somebody just poured a giant concrete slab right next to the ocean. I guess it's perfect for people who are scared of sand. This is at the north end of Ocean Grove, right on the border with Asbury Park, New Jersey. That empty patch used to be the North End Pavilion, a roughly 100-year-old boardwalk building with restaurants and small businesses inside. In April 2019, a massive fire tore through it and destroyed almost the entire building. Nobody died, but the pavilion was basically wiped off the shoreline. This coastline has already been through a lot, because Hurricane Sandy heavily damaged Ocean Grove's boardwalk back in 2012. But if you look past the fence, the beach itself is completely normal. So the ugly part is not really the shore at all, it's just one destroyed building that left this giant concrete scar right beside it. The site has since been bought for redevelopment, so eventually this view might disappear completely. Number 39. Aftermath of Hurricane Katrina. This is New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina hit the Gulf Coast in August 2005. It killed almost 1,400 people and caused about $125 billion in damage, making it one of the deadliest and most expensive hurricanes in modern US history. But much of New Orleans was not simply flooded by rain or the storm surge. The city's flood protection system failed in several places, and by August 31st, around 80% of New Orleans was underwater, with some areas covered by nearly 15 feet of water. Neighborhoods like the lower 9th Ward were hit especially hard, with entire streets of homes surrounded by water almost all the way up to their roofs. Around 80 to 90% of New Orleans residents actually evacuated before Katrina arrived, but city plans estimated that more than 100,000 residents did not own a car, leaving many people dependent on family, neighbors, buses, or emergency transportation to get out. So among the people who stayed were not only those who chose to stay, but also elderly, disabled, poor, and other vulnerable residents who simply had a much harder time leaving. When the evacuation and emergency response became overwhelmed, people ended up stranded on rooftops, inside hospitals, and at the Superdome waiting for help. And somehow, after seeing entire neighborhoods look like this, New Orleans rebuilt. Homes returned, the flood protection network was heavily upgraded, and much of the city recovered, although some areas came back much faster than others. The lower 9th Ward had around 14,000 residents before Katrina, but 20 years later, only around 5,000 people lived there, roughly 1/3 of its original population. Number 40. 7 Mile Bridge. People online are split on whether this is urban hell or just a really beautiful bridge crossing the sea with the most perfect scenery. Maybe we can call it the most beautiful example of urban hell. Unless you have thalassophobia, then this must be a nightmare for you. I just think it's missing several data centers, an underwater Walmart supercenter with a huge parking lot, and maybe some Airbnbs stacked underneath. This is the 7 Mile Bridge, and as the name suggests, it stretches almost 7 miles across the Florida Keys, connecting tiny islands that otherwise wouldn't have a direct road between them. From above, it almost looks fake and pretty fragile. I mean, I definitely wouldn't want to drive across it during a storm. The original bridge beside it was built in the early 1900s, but after a devastating hurricane destroyed much of the railway, it was eventually replaced by the modern highway bridge in 1982. I just hope this new bridge doesn't break too, and they don't go through an endless cycle of building thousands of new bridges side by side until they eventually block the whole sea. This road is both an engineering masterpiece and a reminder that even paradise has become car dependent. That's because almost everyone experiences this incredible landscape from behind a windshield. Unless you're on the small section of the old bridge that's now open to pedestrians and cyclists, which is actually pretty cool until you remember it's under direct sunlight with around 100-degree temperatures and a UV index that feels like it's over 1000. There's also not much of a breeze because of the thick, humid air. Oh, and the bridge doesn't let you go all the way because there's a hole halfway in, so you can only walk or cycle 2.2 miles one way before turning around, for a total round trip of 4.4 miles. To be fair, I'm still surprised the middle of the ocean has better biking infrastructure than 99% of the USA, but I'm not sure which of the two bridges I would willingly take. Because there's basically only one road into Key West, a single crash can leave thousands of people stuck for hours with nowhere else to go. I think I would rather just take a cabin cruiser or a good-sized boat, no accidents to worry about. Without this bridge, the Florida Keys couldn't function the way they do today, bringing in millions of visitors every year and supplying the islands with almost everything they need. But it also cuts straight through one of America's most fragile marine ecosystems, replacing what was once a chain of isolated islands with a highway carrying constant traffic. I can still imagine riding back home along this bridge at the end of the day while the sun sets over the sea. So is it urban hell? Let me know in the comments below. Which one of these locations shocked you the most? And what other examples of urban hell should I cover next? If you enjoyed, Make sure to like and subscribe for more content like this.